The air in the factory was thick with dust and a kind of heavy collective fear. We were paid less than minimum wage, forced to work 14-hour shifts with no overtime, and the fire exit was permanently chained shut. Every rule was broken. Every safety sign was a lie. And the owner, Mr. Elias? He ruled through threats, a heavy-handed, sneering brute who loved reminding us how easily we could all be replaced. He thought our silence was born of weakness. He thought because we desperately needed the work, we would tolerate the injustice forever. He was wrong. My hands were busy on the assembly line, but my mind was focused on one thing: documenting everything. Every missed payment, every unsafe machine, every abusive text message. I didn't yell. I didn't quit. I just saved. And when the time was right, I took the entire massive stack of evidence, the proof of his crimes, and dropped it into the hands of the labor inspectors. The factory noise was loud, but the proof was about to be louder. Hello, everyone. My name is Leila, and I'm 27 years old. This is a story for every person who has ever felt trapped, exploited, or completely disposable in their workplace. If you've ever had a powerful boss who uses your financial insecurity as a weapon against your dignity, then you know the deep sense of powerlessness I felt every single day. Working in that factory wasn't just physical labor, it was a constant erosion of the soul. But in that darkness, I found a cold, hard, tactical resolve. I learned that you don't fight a bully with their own tactics. You fight them with facts and precision. It was a devastating paper trail that leveraged the law to demand justice for all of us who were too afraid to speak. If you've ever dreamed of serving justice to an employer who violated trust and basic human rights, I need you to hit that like button, subscribe, and prepare yourself. This is how a single worker brought down a corrupt empire. So let's begin. The factory was called Monarch Industries. It wasn't huge, but it was the main employer in our small industrial town. I worked the assembly line, packaging electronics components. The work was repetitive, taxing, and relentless. The owner was Mr. Elias. Elias was a man in his late 40s who had inherited the business and carried an air of bloated, unchallenged authority. He drove a luxury car, wore tailored suits, and treated the entire workforce with open contempt. The injustice wasn't hidden. It was the entire business model. Wage theft. We were paid a flat, miserable rate, regardless of the 12 to 14 hours we were forced to clock. Overtime was paid according to the official books, but the actual cash in our hands was consistently short. Safety violations. The air was filled with unfiltered chemicals. The machinery was old and dangerously exposed. I saw 2 serious accidents in my first year that were quickly swept under the rug with hush money. The climate of fear. Elias cultivated a toxic environment. His favorite tactic was the threat. He would walk the floor yelling, "If anyone complains, I know where you live, and you'll never work in this town again." I remember one instance, clear as day. My friend, Maria, a single mother, asked the foreman about her missing overtime pay. Elias overheard. He walked up to her, his face inches from hers, and whispered, "I don't employ complainers, Maria. You have children, yes?" Think about what happens if your bank account is suddenly empty. Maria burst into tears and never asked again. That moment solidified my purpose. The raw, physical sensation of helplessness Watching Maria crumple under his threat was suffocating. My hands were vibrating with anger, but I knew that yelling would only get me fired. I needed a different plan. The protagonist's resolve, becoming the archivist. I realized that Elias's power lay in two things: our fear and his ability to hide his crimes. I couldn't control the fear, but I could destroy his ability to hide. My new job wasn't packaging components, it was collecting evidence. I started small. I bought a cheap, used smartphone. Better camera, more memory. Safety. I began taking pictures during my breaks. The chained fire exit, the exposed wiring, the chemical barrel stored incorrectly. I focused on detail, serial numbers, dates visible on a calendar in the background. Wage theft. Every payday, I would discreetly photograph my official, full pay stub and the actual much lower cash payment I received. I started a private, encrypted digital ledger, cross-referencing hours worked and pay received for myself and discreetly for Maria and a few others. Threats. Elias loved using text messages to communicate arbitrary shift changes or threats. I saved every single one, often forwarding them to a private cloud account that he couldn't access. I did this for nearly a year. I was a spy in plain sight. The tension was constant. Every time I pulled out my phone, my palms would sweat and my breathing would become shallow and ragged. I was always on edge, meticulously wiping my phone clean of any suspicious files before going home. My internal monologue was a mantra of cold focus. Be patient. Don't confront. Just document. Every lie he tells is another nail in his coffin. As I continued to work, Elias's arrogance only grew. He became more brazen, convinced that his threats had completely silenced the work voice. He started charging us a fee for drinking water, claiming the city had increased the water tariff. He cut the mandatory 15-minute break to 10 minutes. The frustration among the workers was palpable, a constant low-level thrum of despair. Some workers started talking about quitting, but they couldn't afford to. They were trapped. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up on the assembly line and tell them all. I had the proof, but I knew the timing had to be perfect. If I struck too early, the company would simply pay a small fine, fire me, and retaliate against everyone else. I needed the evidence to be overwhelming, a mountain of undeniable proof that demanded total systemic intervention. I realized that my mission wasn't revenge. It was justice for the collective. I had become the silent guardian of the truth for everyone in that toxic building. The final piece of evidence came when Elias prepared to expand the factory using a massive unsecured bank loan. He sent a company-wide email, which I immediately screenshotted, emphasizing how important the expansion was, and that the only reason they got the loan was because the financial books looked clean. The email ended with a veiled, terrifying threat. If the inspectors find anything out of place now, we all lose everything. This was it. He had essentially admitted that the books were fraudulent, and he was terrified of exposure. His vulnerability was the signal. I spent one final intense night organizing my archive. I encrypted the full comprehensive file, 400 photos, 80 documents, and dozens of damning text messages. The file was organized into clear, undeniable categories: wage theft, safety violations, and documented threats. I knew my target had to be external and powerful: the State Labor Inspectorate and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. They had the power to levy enormous fines, shut down the operation, and trigger criminal investigation. I couldn't risk sending the email from my home computer or phone. I chose a local library 2 towns over. I used a public computer and a disposable email address. My goal was absolute anonymity, ensuring that Elias would never suspect the source was a junior line worker. I attached the meticulously labeled, encrypted files and wrote a simple, cold cover letter. The attached documents contain verifiable evidence of severe, sustained labor law and safety violations at Monarch Industries. Address, license number provided. Immediate investigation is required to protect the workers. I pressed send. I walked out of the library and felt a dizzying mix of fear and exhilaration. I was still Leila, the line worker, but I had just fired a shot that would shake the entire town. I went back to work the next day, forcing myself into a state of professional blankness. Elias walked the floor, oblivious, smiling his usual smug, entitled smile. He thought he was safe. The investigation moved swiftly, quietly, and professionally, exactly as I had hoped. 3 days later, I was on the assembly line when the double doors burst open. It wasn't Elias. It was a team of labor inspectors and OSHA officials in bright vests, flanked by police officers. The noise of the machinery slowly died down as everyone froze. The air hung still, thick with shock and a slow, growing hope. Elias came running out of his office, red-faced and yelling, "What is the meaning of this? You can't just barge in here." The lead inspector held up a thick file. My file. "We have received detailed, corroborated evidence of massive and ongoing labor law violations, Mr. Elias. We are shutting down all machinery immediately. This is a full inspection and freeze on all operational assets." The factory floor was sealed. The inspectors moved quickly, validating every single photograph I had sent. The changed door, the exposed wires, the chemical storage. I stood by my station, my hands resting on the inactive machinery. I didn't cheer. I didn't make eye contact with anyone. I simply watched the systemic dismantling of his power. The justice was immediate and tangible. Elias was screaming, pleading, attempting to bribe the officers. He looked ridiculous, stripped of his authority, reduced to a desperate, pathetic bully. I clocked out early, along with everyone else, instructed to await further news. I didn't go home. I walked across the street to a small, quiet cafe that overlooked the factory gates. I sat by the window, ordered a cup of tea, and watched the chaos unfold. I saw Elias, his face pale and sweating, being led to a police car, not under arrest, but clearly detained and furious. I saw reporters arriving. I saw the relief on the faces of my coworkers as they left the building. Their fear replaced by a bewildered sense of vindication. Elias was begging the lead inspector for leniency, pointing to his lawyers. He looked across the street, his eyes wild and desperate, searching for the culprit, the traitor. He never saw me. I was just a woman drinking tea, perfectly still, perfectly safe, watching the end of his empire. The factory was eventually hit with millions in fines, forced to pay back years of unpaid wages, and eventually sold off entirely under federal investigation. Elias was personally ruined, barred from operating a business in the state, and facing multiple lawsuits from the workers he exploited. My revenge was not loud. It was the simple, perfect knowledge that the factory was shut down, not by a mob, but by the undeniable proof I had patiently collected. The moment of absolute triumph wasn't when Elias was escorted out. It was months later, when the factory was sold and the workers received their retroactive paychecks. Negotiated and enforced by the state, I received my check, the largest deposit I had ever seen. It was the physical embodiment of the justice I had fought for. I never spoke about my role. I found a new, ethical job where I am paid fairly and treated with respect. My coworkers still talk about the miracle tip that brought the inspectors, never suspecting that the quietest person on the line was the one who engineered the entire revolution. I didn't expose myself. I didn't need the spotlight. My justice was internal, clean, and complete. Some days I still feel the urge to be angry, but then I remember the day I sat in that cafe, sipping tea, watching the corrupt structure collapse entirely due to the power of a few clear, undeniable photographs. The greatest power isn't the ability to make threats, it's the ability to collect the evidence that makes the truth unavoidable. And I did that perfectly. Leaving Monarch Industries felt like finally breathing clean air. The lessons I learned there were harsh but essential. I realized that when you are in a powerless position, your most effective strategy is not aggression, but meticulous, cold documentation. Anger is temporary, but evidence is permanent. Elias underestimated me because I was quiet, young, and on the assembly line. He thought my silence was compliance. He never understood that my silence was actually preparation. I want this story to be a message to anyone currently facing exploitation. You are not powerless. You may not be able to change things immediately, but you can quietly, patiently build the case. Use your phone. Save the texts. Document the truth. Justice sometimes doesn't come with a megaphone. Sometimes it comes with a simple, anonymous email containing a single, irrefutable truth. And that quiet kind of justice is the most satisfying of all. If this story gave you chills, if you believe in the quiet power of evidence and the need for worker dignity, please smash that like button and subscribe to my channel. We fight for justice and truth here every single week. I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what is the most courageous act of resistance against unfair power you have ever witnessed or carried out? Please hit that notification bell to join our community. And always remember, the greatest revolutions begin not with anger, but with quiet, patient proof.